Today I'm going to walk you through creating this scene as you see it here, using the paintbrush and different brushes and learning to adjust them to have different effects, colors, size, etc. Okay, so the file that you're going to start with is called L5Start. It's found on the Haiku page, and I'll also put it in the description below this video. So the file looks like this to begin with. It's got the guides that you can see where you should trace your lines to make the scene. First of all, the paintbrush tool in Illustrator is right here in the toolbox. If you double click it, you'll see there are some options that you can change for this tool. You can change the accuracy. To the right for the fidelity will smooth things out. To the left will make it very accurate to what you draw. Keeping it in the middle is typically a good way to go. Another thing that you can change is whether you're going to have lines keep selected after you've drawn them, and then also the ability to edit those selected paths. What that basically means is if you draw a line, in this case, it's still selected. You can see the anchor points are active and selected. If I click and drag over it within a certain distance of it, I can reshape that line while it's selected. If I command click away from it, it's no longer selected. I can no longer edit it. Anytime I draw again, it's going to draw a new line. But like I said, editing lines is possible while they're selected with that setting. Okay. The brushes in the brushes palette are what are used whenever you use the paintbrush. You can't use the paintbrush without choosing a brush, okay? These top row of brushes are called calligraphic brushes. They are basically brushes that have the same settings that can be adjusted. There's angle, roundness, and size. The most basic way to make a brush would be to make it one point fully round, and the angle would not matter. But this would just give you a very thin 1-point line when you draw. The rest of the calligraphic brushes are variations on that same type of brush. So if you double click it, you'll see it may have a different angle, roundness, or size. The point of calligraphy is that it's typically done as a form of writing where when you drag the brush or pen in one direction, it makes a thin line, and in another it makes a thick line. Often see this used in different languages and in fancy writing on wedding invitations and the such. Okay, delete that. Okay, so those are your calligraphic brushes. Scatter brushes, this next row, these are brushes that basically scatter artwork along the line that you draw. So for example, the dog brush is going to make paw prints. Those paw prints are always going to follow my line, and they're going to be very uniform. They're going to be equidistant on either side of the line. They're going to turn with the line, and there's the same space between them each time. Unlike that, this leaf brush, if I double click it, you'll see the size, spacing, scatter, and rotation are all set to random. That means when you use it, it's going to be different each time. It'll be a different number of leaves, there'll be a different size, different space, different scatter. Okay. Also notice that my leaves are showing up as black. This brush, or any brush really, is based on the color of that the stroke is set to. Though you'll notice as you try to use some brushes, they won't change no matter what you make your stroke color. That's because you've got to change to a colorization method. Okay, if it's set to none, you can't change the color of that brush. If you set it to hue shift, which is just a straight color change, or tints, which will lighten, or tints and shades, which will lighten and darken with whatever color your stroke is, that will let you change your color. Okay, so this should give me black arrows. Okay, delete all that again. Whoops, wrong. A delete. Okay, so back to the scatter brush. the dog tracks, if I double click it, you'll see everything is a fixed setting. Dog's been fixed. So they're all going to be the same size, uniform spacing, scatter, and rotation. Okay. Scatter is how far the pieces of artwork are going to be from the line that you draw. And 0 means they're right on the line. So for the fall leaf, if I were to change my scatter to 0 for both of these and draw, they're all going to be right on the line. If instead I change one to negative something and the other at 0, they're all going to be the same distance, well, no greater than minus 62 from the line. Okay, so they're random within that spacing. If I set it to fixed and leave it at 64, they're all going to be the same distance from the line. Okay, with me so far? I hope so. Okay, so those are scatter brushes. Just know that these settings can be changed, and if it's set to random, it's a range of values. Okay, so it's negative 100 to positive 100. They're going to scatter on either side of the line to that amount. Okay. If you want them all closer to the line, make this a smaller value. Well, minus 50 is actually a larger value, but I think you understand what I'm saying. And then here, if I want my spacing, I want them closer together overall, I'll do less of a range. It'll be more compact piles of leaves. Okay? The next group of brushes are art brushes. Art brushes are brushes that will stretch artwork along the line that you draw. If you draw a short line, it'll squash it. If you draw a long line, it'll stretch it out. Though you can change the setting in here to have it scale proportionately. What that means is if you draw with it, it's going to make a tiny line of that same piece of artwork. It's going to scale the whole thing smaller. If you go it bigger, it's going to get bigger. Okay? So, keep that on no change. Art brushes are pretty straightforward. You could make an art brush out of virtually anything. If I drag a rectangle into this palette, choose art brush, it's just going to make a very blocky rectangle. If I wanted to make two, experiment here a little bit. Gonna have a little brush here. What's it gonna look like? Big train tracks, sort of idea. If I were gonna make train tracks, there would probably be a better way to do it. I know there's a better way to do it. But you get the idea. Okay. The last type of brush is called a pattern brush. Pattern brushes use what are called pattern swatches to create a brush. If you look at this rope brush, you'll see it's got a tile here for the side and a tile for the start and the end. What that means is when I use this brush, each time I use it, it's going to have a rounded end on each end. It It doesn't have any corners, so if I make something sharper than a 90, probably an 89-degree corner, it's going to break my rope. Okay, no corners. The way that you make tiles or patterns for a pattern brush is to drag artwork into the swatches palette. So I'm going to demonstrate that with this cloud and this sun. So what I'm going to do, first of all, is go to the object menu and unlock all. These little pieces of artwork were locked here. Couldn't select them and do anything with them until you did that. Okay. So first, to make that pattern brush, I'm going to drag my cloud into this palette. This is the swatches palette. And then I'll drag the sun in, and you'll see both of them are right there. One thing to be careful of is not to have one of them selected and click on one of these swatches, because it will apply that as a fill on that shape and make a mess. Okay. Now, once these are pattern swatches, you could name them. If you double click it, you'll see this pattern options open up. You can name it cloud. I'm going to click done. Do the same with my sun. And then back in my brushes panel, I'm going to click the new brush button and choose a pattern brush. That lets me choose from my list of different pattern swatches that I have to make this brush. So I chose the side tile, and that's the cloud right there. So for the corner tile, I'm going to choose the sun. And to make the border around this scene, I'm just going to make a rectangle and click on that brush. Now, notice my fill is set to this sun pattern, so I'm just going to click none for that, so that we have that nice border. To make the scatter brush to make the cloud, I'm going to drag this cloud into my brushes palette directly and choose scatter brush. And I know it needs to be bigger and more spaced out. And I also want to make the rotation relative to the path, so that when I draw the path on a curve that curves, the clouds will curve with it. So what I'm going to do then is switch to my paintbrush and make a line. Now, I can double click this, maybe change the spacing a little bit so that I can get 3 clouds showing up. Now, when I close that, I want to apply that change that I just made. If I click leave, it's going to put them back to the prior spacing, and it will only change anything I do afterwards. So I want to apply that to what I already did that way, and I need to probably sneak this over a little bit. Okay, so the rest of this scene is pretty straightforward. There is a key on this file called L5End. It tells you which brushes to use to make the scene. So, for example, you're going to use the leaf scatter brush to make leaves on the tree, the charcoal brush to make the tree trunk. You may want to make it thinner. That's up to you. Grass brush, tapered brush for the boat. Now, one thing about the boat has a fill on this one side. To do that, the way you would need to make that is to take, note, switching to a different brush when you have something selected will apply that brush to it. Okay, so I'm going to switch to the tapered brush. I'm going to make sure that its color is going to be changed when I use it. So I'm going to do a hue shift, hit OK, and I'll make it brown. Okay, so to fill this side of the boat, I would actually have to make a line that goes all the way along this edge and then back. Okay, not bad, not great. And then I could put a fill on that. Though one thing I'll point out, the paintbrush may be more difficult to use with precision than the pen tool, which you already know. So the pen tool, all you would need to do is use your pen tool to make this shape. I'm not going to actually close it. I'll make it close like that. And then apply that tapered brush to it. Meh, it's okay. So either way you want to work will work. That's a really pointy boat. Looks dangerous. Be careful. All right, that is the basics of using the paintbrush tool and the brushes palette. Please finish up the rest of this to make it look like you see here.